2 years ago, Azerbaijan launched an unprovoked incursion into sovereign Armenian territory. The video you just watched is me in the southern city of Sisyan, in the wake of Azeri shelling. The battles claimed hundreds of victims, including Armenian female soldiers, horrifically abused before their deaths. Swaths of Armenian lands, once shielded by mountainous Artsakh, remain under occupation. Notably, those attacks came exactly 2 weeks after the Armenian authorities handed over the Berdzor or Lachin corridor, once the lifeline between Armenia and Artsakh, which many of us had warned would not satisfy Azerbaijan, but instead lead to attacks on Armenia itself. We'll discuss the lessons not learned from 2022, the view from Washington, and why neighboring Georgia matters in this Hairenik newscast. First, let's go to our correspondent in Yerevan, Nare, for more. Welcome, Nare.
Hi, Alison.
Nare, 2 years ago, Azerbaijan attacked all along the eastern border with Armenia, from the resort town of Jermuk to Kapan in the far south. That event shocked many, but you and I were both in Berdzor just weeks before that attack happened, as it was being handed over. So what did the September 2022 events tell Armenian society about Azerbaijan's real intentions?
Well, for the longest time, certain segments of Armenian society made this distinction between attacks on Artsakh, which was considered, because it's disputed territory, then Azerbaijan is legitimate in its attacks. Those attacks were normalized, and there was Armenia proper, or the Republic of Armenia, which was considered somehow sovereign and defended by default. That there was this myth that Armenia proper is always going to be there, and that all these claims about maximalistic Azerbaijan and Aliyev were just perpetuated by nationalists and radicals. So all those myths were just shattered overnight in 2022 as Azerbaijan launched a large attack all across the eastern border. From Goris to Sisyan, inhabitants were really shocked. It was very shocking to hear about the names of martyrs that died for Jermuk, for example, and not somewhere in Artsakh. So it's clear now that for Aliyev, that claimed even the town of Jermuk as an ancient Azerbaijani land, all of Armenia is fair game, and they're not going to be stopped unless there is a force.
Indeed.
Stopping them.
Let's talk about what actually occurred during those battles. Armenian soldiers actually fought quite well, and they were able to encircle dozens of Azeri troops on Armenian territory. We're going to be seeing a video that shows us the Chief of Staff of Armenia. Nare, what did he say? Tell us what the Chief of Staff said during those days.
The Chief of Staff, Asaryan, claimed that even though those Azerbaijanis were encircled, they were surrounded by Armenian posts, that they would soon, quote, run out of food, that they would be starved, and that they would have to retreat. And to this day, that hasn't happened. Azerbaijan has held on to those positions. They have built infrastructure and roads to support those positions. But it must have been really disheartening for a lot of Armenians to hear the Chief of Staff saying that they're not really going to use force, or even they're not going to take POWs, even though Baku was still holding on and is still to this day holding on to many Armenians, prisoners of war, hostages, however you call them. So if Armenian army had acted, we could go for an exchange. That would be the logical thing to do, considering that the attack was launched by Azerbaijan. We had full legitimacy to take POWs from this.
Indeed, and again, those troops were on Armenian territory, and today those territories host essentially Azerbaijani outposts, including above Sisyan, where I was on those days. Now on Mount Ishkhanasar, you can see with the naked eye the roads and fortifications that Azerbaijan has built. At the same time, these are exactly the points where, Armenia is talking about some sort of crossroads of peace. So what we've seen over the last 2 years is these areas that are intended to serve as this supposed crossroads have been steadily either given to Azerbaijan by concession, by unilateral concession, as in the case of territories of Artsakh after the 2020 war, Goris-Kapan Highway following the war, as well as the Bertsor corridor, and then via this attack of September 2022, those lands were also simply left under Azeri control. Pashinyan lately was asked about those over 200 square kilometers of sovereign Armenian territory that are occupied by Azerbaijan. Nare, what did he say that Armenia would be willing and not willing to do to restore its sovereign control over its lands?
Firstly, he said that use of force was not a possibility. And secondly, I believe he referred to this process of demarcation and delimitation that so far has only resulted in Armenia losing territory and never gaining them. So he thought that those issues, when it comes to Jermuk and Ishkhanasar near Sisyan, those will be resolved during this demarcation process. Interestingly enough, Asaryan also recently, when asked about Azerbaijani military positions near Jermuk, said that, lashed out at the journalist and said, well, are you going to come fight with me? Pick up your weapon and let's go retake those military positions. So it's very clear that Armenia is not flinching. It's following its long process of surrender that is called normalization. And it doesn't even matter what Azerbaijan does, because Pashinyan is making it clear that they're never going to use force, no matter what Azerbaijan does.
Yeah, that is certainly a pattern of the Pashinyan administration where no one is actually responsible for their jobs, and when asked about fulfilling their duties, simply says that, puts it on anyone else who is actually not tasked to do those duties. Maybe we could volunteer our graphic designer to go fight in Jermuk. So I want to talk also about, we are not going to show these gory videos, but there were numerous atrocities committed by Azerbaijan in 2022. Nare, what were some of those atrocities, and has there been any sign that Azerbaijan is going to prosecute its forces for those atrocities?
The videos you're referring to were mainly, I think, against some of our female military staff. And I think 5 of them were actually mentioned by the human rights defender of Armenia. But those videos were widely spread with pride, and Azerbaijani special group Yashma claimed responsibility for it. And of course, in Azerbaijan, the perpetrators of these atrocities are treated as heroes, and there is no sign of any of them, even on the level of rhetoric, saying that they did something wrong. So it's clear that even though they're war criminals, and Bob Menendez, on this very basis of these videos, even though there have been numerous before, on this basis called for America to stop all financial aid to Azerbaijan, because it shouldn't support terrorists and war criminals. Even though this has been the case, we see that justice for those women, those mutilated and tortured and raped women, is is not there. It's not coming from anybody, neither the international community nor Armenia itself, and of course not Aliyev.
Indeed, the only one who's lost anything since that is Bob Menendez. Nare, Armenia's defense minister was just in China. The French are prepared to sell more weapons to Armenia, as is India. How do we square this with what Pashinyan has said, that Armenia is not going to use force? How do we evaluate these ongoing acquisitions? Is this, not to assume, but, one can be concerned that this is simply superficial, or perhaps to put people in Yerevan or the diaspora at ease?
It has been clear that Pashinyan is fighting a war, but he's only fighting the informational war. And this news about acquisitions from India and France serve more his general goal of appeasing people and in Armenia and the diaspora, giving his supporters something to argue with, when it is very clear that Armenia, even the weapons that it had, it did not use, not even in 2020. And if you look at the timeline, in 2020, Pashinyan, after the capitulation, he made a list of promises, one of which was the quick recovery of the army. And it's so clear that in those 2 years, significant work could have been done. And indeed, if you listen to their loyalists, it was done. But for some reason, we don't really see Armenian armed forces standing in defense of Armenia's national interests.
Indeed, so in fact, we see them being replaced by the border guards.
Yes. But for the viewers, I think in the future it would be much better if they concern themselves with the end results of whether people in Goris feel safe, whether they feel safe in Jermuk, whether they feel safe in Sisyan, whether they felt safe in Artsakh, which was also according to the Declaration of Independence under Armenia's security umbrella. So people should ask themselves if people feel safe living in Goris or were safe living in Stepanakert, rather than if we purchase this or purchase that, because it's clear you can just buy anything and everything and then just safely store them or just use it for money laundering.
Indeed. Let's switch gears. In recent days, US congressmen and women heard the testimony of the Helsinki Commission, which is a structure established during the Cold War by the US Congress, I believe in 1975. Let's hear what they had to say about Armenia and the direction they want it to go.
Now is also a time to set realistic expectations. The road ahead will be long. Casting off the burdens of cultivated dependency demands long-term structural reforms and investments. It is the work of a generation and will extend beyond the term of a single leader. Moscow will likely try to retard progress. Armenians must be prepared to endure some cold winters. We must be prepared to sustain our support for the long term.
Nare, what does he mean about cold winters? How literal should we take this?
Well, I think it's as literal as it comes, because nowadays Armenia just relies on cheap Russian gas. That's equivalent, I think, to a few billions of dollars of investment by Russia into Armenian economy. But in any case, America has always been clear that one of their goals is to reduce Armenia's dependency on Russia, and then ultimately push Russia out of South Caucasus entirely. So he's just referring to Armenia refusing to buy Russian gas.
I think we should point out that Armenia is being pressed to cut itself from from its own gas infrastructure, while Europe, the EU, is knowingly buying Russian gas via Azerbaijan. And now I believe a new deal is even being struck to import Russian energy to Europe via Ukraine, which the West is supporting in its war with Russia. So the crippling of Armenia's energy independence is seems to be considered as okay collateral damage as long as it serves the goal of ultimately expelling Russia from Armenia. Let's also, though, mention, what about, it's not only the US that has a strong position on this. Nari, what is the historic campaign of Turkey when it comes to Armenia's energy sector?
So Turkey has always been worried about Armenia's own nuclear energy. 40% of Armenia's energy, I think more than 40, is produced by the nuclear plant Metsamor. So for the longest time, it was Turkey's goal to talking about the environmental damages, about the need to renew, to move away. Their plan has been to cripple Armenia's energy independence. And of course, here, another argument is that it is Russia that is managing the waste from this nuclear plant. So this would be yet another step of Washington's overarching goal of having South Caucasus in general and Armenia in particular entirely free of Russian influence.
And what did Samantha Power say in these past times she was in Armenia? What is the U.S. position on this?
It's interesting because Samantha Power came to Armenia right after, months after the Artsakh ethnic cleansing. And you would think that that would be her primary concern, that she would, address this. But I think she even refused to call it an ethnic cleansing and started talking about just completely redoing Armenia's energy sector. So that was interesting. It really shows where the priorities of America are.
I think that we should mention that should Armenia be cut from Russia's gas, then I would say that just as we learned from the September 2022 attacks, that in the view of Azerbaijan, there's no difference between Artsakh and Armenia, that they will likely view Armenia's energy needs in the same way as they viewed Artsakh's energy needs. I think we can recall that the Artsakh blockade began with Azerbaijan cutting the pipeline between Armenia and Artsakh and basically making Artsakh freeze in the dead of winter. I do not see any indication that Azerbaijan would treat Armenia proper, as they say, any differently, and rather Armenia would, as in the words of the Helsinki Commission, experience cold winters. So that is that's the only thing I can conclude. So I would also take those words literally.
I think they first started by just cutting gas sporadically as soon as they obtained control over Berzor gas line. And then it became very clear. And then they started conversations like, oh, is Azerbaijan trying to hook Artsakh onto its own gas system? Are they trying to have Artsakh be dependent on Azeri gas? And then it became so clear ultimately that Azerbaijan had no plans whatsoever to give any gas or any energy to the Armenian population of Artsakh. And so I think this is going to be a similar situation where perhaps if they have this goodwill suddenly, maybe for a year or two, they will play like, yes, you can depend on our energy, even though perhaps the price is going to be higher and there are constantly going to be cuts. And then after a few years, when it's convenient for them, there will be like a full attack, and then Armenia will be fully dependent on Azerbaijani gas. So,
and just before we
really
move topics, I think we should mention that Armenia's main gas line, which once ultimately fed Artsakh, goes through the northeast region of Tavush, which, as we know, our audience knows, was the flashpoint of the latest protest movement against land concessions, and why not only because of farmland, people losing their home, but also because that gas line passes through Tavush, and the very areas that they are in the process of handing over to Azerbaijan will ultimately give Azerbaijan control, at least fire control, over Armenia's pipeline. And I think we can all predict what will happen next. This will likely get blamed, whether on Azeri troops or on Russia, but we can all see and say from now that it's very clear what is going to happen to this infrastructure as Pashinyan sequentially hands over these pieces of territory that it runs through. So Nare, switching gears, but speaking of Tavush, Tavush borders not only Azerbaijan but also Georgia. Why is Georgia so important for Armenia? What takes, the Prime Minister of Armenia, Pashinyan, is currently there on a state visit, but in general, what is so significant about Georgia for Armenia, specifically when it comes to its outlet for the world?
Well, the most important thing is that for many years, as Turkey closed the border and there's the conflict with Azerbaijan, Georgia remained like the longest open border, and for Armenia, it was very important to get out of economic blockade, same as the Mehri border. So the most important economic project in the works is the North-South that is going to, via Georgia, is going to open up, economic trade routes to the Black Sea and to Europe for Iran. And it is clear that Georgia very much also wants to be a part of it, and its normalization with its biggest market right next to it, Russia, also speaks of the importance of this connection of Armenia and Georgia.
Indeed, and we just saw the current Georgian PM go all the way to Tehran in a surprise visit, I believe, for the funeral of Iran's president, former President Raisi. So indeed, it seems that Georgia is putting an emphasis on this north-south corridor. And let's talk about Georgia's upcoming elections. At the end of October, Georgia's ruling party is going to go for re-election. Should they win, Nari, what can Armenia expect, and how could Armenia kind of take advantage of the way Georgia's going?
This will Georgian dream winning will likely mean that Russian weapons will likely be able to cross over the Georgian border without any stops. Another thing would be the opening of this market for Georgia itself, the increasing connections with Russia. Recently, there have been hints of Georgia trying to resolve, somehow, perhaps work towards an equivalent of Minsk agreements with Abkhazia. And we will see how it will develop politically. But Georgian Dream itself is positioning these elections as a choice between war and peace. War being, of course, referring to the possibility of third parties trying to open a second front for Russia in this region via Georgia and Georgian lives. Recently we've seen very interesting developments in Georgia trying to follow its own sovereign path, and it's very much in line with this international choice of whether countries want to follow the old ways or if they want to go their own national path. And this is what we will see unfurl. A lot of expectation of unrest is there. The opposition is already gearing up. So these elections are not going to be probably easy and peaceful ones if Georgian Dream gets reelected.
So Georgia's ruling party leader, Ivanishvili, who's at the top of the party's list for the upcoming elections, in recent days, he actually said that Georgia would prosecute those responsible for instigating the 2008 attack on South Ossetia, and also said that there would be an apology, an official apology by Georgia for that war and the impact it had on the people of Ossetia. Now, that is a massive change since Saakashvili's presidency, when the conflict between Georgia and Russia was at its height. It would have been under Saakashvili, I believe, unthinkable for Georgia to say that it had any role in how those events transpired. And certainly, as you said, Nare, it seems to be a move towards reconciliation, towards peace, multilateralism, and ultimately could lead to normalization between Georgia and Russia, which is basically the opposite of the way that Armenia is going, although Armenia's government is also promising peace and putting the emphasis on normalization, but it seems to be only normalization with Turkey, which has manifested, unfortunately, in war and has not led to any respite for the Armenian people, but only a creeping annexation by Azerbaijan. So let's keep an eye on the Georgian elections and how Armenia responds. Thank you so much, Nare.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you all for joining us this week. That was a lot. We'll be sure to keep you updated on developments. And next week, we will certainly be talking about an even more weighty anniversary, which is that of Azerbaijan's 2023 attack on Artsakh, which led to the exodus of its entire population. Thank you all for joining us. Be sure to follow us, subscribe to us on YouTube at Hairenik, so you will be notified of all of our episodes and programming. Thank you.